Hey, little buddy, want a ride?
Pikachu!
Yeah, whatever.
As a child of the late 90s, my culture is rooted in the 2000s. Decades like the 2010s and 2020s may feel a little bit more blurred, but I assure you that you could feel the stark contrast between the 90s apathetic culture predominant in the West cannonballing to the transparently self-conscious 2000s. One survivor of the cultural shift was the Pokemon franchise, although at a negligible cut to its popularity. I did not grow up on Kanto, nor did I have any attachment to Johto. The original Hoenn games, Ruby and Sapphire, is where I came first acquainted with the franchise. My only real attachment to those first two generations were with the anime and their eventual remakes. But Ruby and Sapphire's vacuum-tight gameplay loop and obtuse mysteries left me so hooked, I had difficulty imagining how the first two games wouldn't be amazing and full of possibilities. My own strategy guide for Ruby and Sapphire might be more creased and beloved than any other book in my collection, and despite this I would still be immediately sat for playground rumors and internet theories about my precious Hoenn region. Looking back, this is both hilarious and short-sighted in retrospect. I didn't even buy Emerald. As of present day, present time, I still haven't played it. But I still lived in a world where the franchise felt like its most interesting aspects were the hardest bits to find. I got all the Reggies with the Wailord and Relicanth reading those messages in Braille. I climbed the original Sky Pillar with all the stupid bike pathing, and you bet your ass I went to Mirage Island and was incredibly disappointed. Pokemon felt like a mystery box, at least in those early generations. Although it felt like Generation 4 and 5 may have stepped a little bit back from some of those more mythical qualities, the end of the 2000s and the start of the 2010s led into the golden age of creepypasta, and with this came an outpour of Pokemon-related creepypastas. The natural evolution of your muse under the truck was not realized in Pokemon Black, but Pokemon Black, an anonymously authored creepypasta from around 2010 about a bootleg cartridge called Pokemon Black. I've heard some people in recent years refer to this as Pokemon Creepy Black, however the game is called Pokemon Black version in the literal third paragraph, so I don't know what to tell you. Pokemon Black is written from the perspective of a person who's a collector of bootleg Pokemon games. Back when those lived more on actual cartridges than ROMs in the bowels of the internet, Black is referred to as a ROM hack of Red, which is confirmed by the intro and Professor Oak's speech being identical. However, the game differs when you pick your starter and you find out you have a second Pokemon in your party, Ghost, which appears to have the same sprite of the ghosts you encounter in Lavender Town in Generation 1. Ghost also comes with the special move Curse, a hacked move, as Curse would not appear until Generation 2. Defending Pokemon were unable to attack Ghost. It would only say that they were too scared to move. When the move Curse was used in battle, the screen would cut to black. The cry of the defending Pokemon would be heard, but it was distorted, played at a much lower pitch than normal. The battle screen would then reappear, and the defending Pokemon would be gone. If used in a battle against a trainer, when the Pokeballs representing the Pokemon would appear in the corner, they would have fewer Pokeballs. The implication was that the Pokemon died. After defeating a trainer, the player would also choose between Run and Curse. If the player uses Curse, the overworld sprite of the trainer will be replaced with a tombstone similar to the ones in Lavender Town. Yes, if the name Pokemon Black didn't ring any bells, you might also remember this as the infamous creepypasta with a mechanic to kill NPCs with your Pokemon.
That look you gave me, it's so intriguing. Be nice.
In a somewhat adorably well-thought manner, the creepypasta takes the time to point out that the curse will only work on non-ghost Pokemon. A trivial matter in Generation 1, considering the Gengar line was the only ghost types available. Secondly, it cannot be used on characters you fight multiple times like Giovanni or the rival until the final time that you fight them. According to the author, they ended up using Curse throughout the game because it made every encounter trivial. The game changed quite a bit after defeating the Elite Four. After viewing the Hall of Fame, which consisted of ghosts and a couple of Pokemon I used for HMs, the screen cut to black. A box appeared with the words "many years later." It then cut to Lavender Town. An old man was standing, looking at tombstones. You then realized this man was your character. The man moved at only half of your normal walking speed. You no longer had any Pokemon with you, even Ghost, who up at this point had been impossible to remove your party through depositing in the PC. The overworld was entirely empty. There were no people at all. There were still the tombstones of the trainers you used Cursed on. Upon entering your house and going to the exact tile where you started the game, it would then cut to black. Then a sprite of a Caterpie appeared. It was then replaced by a Weedle, and then a Pidgey. I soon realized, as the Pokemon progressed from Rattata to Blastoise, that these were all the Pokemon that I had used Cursed on. After the end of my rival's team, a youngster appeared, and then a bug catcher. Those were the trainers I had cursed. Throughout the sequence, the Lavender Town music was playing, but it was slowly decreasing in pitch. By the time your rival appeared on screen, it was little more than a demonic rumble. Yes, the famous Pokemon Ghost hits you with the Metal Gear Solid 3 The Swirl boss fight before fighting you in a Pokemon battle. It's just the player as an old man fighting Ghost with no Pokemon and no moves. Just you using the move Struggle, the move that automatically populates when you have no more moves left to use, which as a normal type against a Ghost type does no damage, until the player comes close to dying of chip damage and then mercifully Ghost uses Curse on you. The screen would turn to black and soft lock, turning the game back on would reveal that your save data had been deleted. I think generally, I would give some level of analysis on a work of fiction like this to explore its themes, though its own author reflects on them itself. I'm not sure what the motives behind the creator of this hack. It wasn't widely distributed, so it presumably was not for monetary gain. It was very well done for a bootleg. It seems he was trying to convey a message, though it seems I'm the sole receiver of this message. I'm not entirely sure of what it is. The inevitability of death, the pointlessness of it. Perhaps he was simply trying to morbidly inject death and darkness into a children's game. Regardless, this children's game has made me think, and it has made me cry.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the...
Ignoring the kind of lame line that it ends on, I think the most interesting aspect of the author, or at least the protagonist of Pokemon Black the Creepypasta, outlining their own analysis of the themes of this fake ROM hack is that I just kinda don't agree with them at all. Pokemon Black invokes questioning on why in this franchise we use dangerous creatures to battle each other. Why do we ask our companions to do battle with each other if we risk them getting hurt? Ironically, a theme touched on both in the actual game Pokemon Black and White, and also done way more masterfully than the Pokemon Black and Blue PETA satire game made around the same time. Ghost is more of a force of nature than anything, and taking the easy route by having it literally kill other Pokemon is so cruel and twisted that your death by its hands feels like an inevitability. There was no one left but you, of course. However, one last point that might contradict my read and kind of makes the entire themes of the creepypasta meaningless is that it's spelled out that if you try to play the game like normal, it'll just skip to the final encounter with Ghost. While Ghost is shown as a vindictive spirit punishing the player for using it to kill Pokemon and trainers, in this depiction it might just seem like an inevitability. Either way, Pokemon Black is a surprisingly competent creepypasta that today feels like it's maybe more maligned due to its similarity and lack of complexity compared to similar creepypastas we're going to discuss. However, from a modern lens, it's fascinating how Pokemon Black has similarities to Undertale No Mercy routes of all things, both featuring players who kill everything they encounter, creating a quiet world where everyone is dead, and ending in an impossible encounter. Although Sans, unlike Ghost, can actually be beaten, I do kinda wonder if Toby Fox has actually read Pokemon Black. Next up, let's look at the much more popular Pokemon Lost Silver, authored sometime in 2009. Lost Silver chronicles a college student who, while waiting for their copy of Pokemon Soul Silver to arrive from Amazon, decides to buy a used $10 copy of Pokemon Silver from GameStop while waiting. Why they didn't just buy a copy of Silver at the GameStop instead of Amazon isn't really addressed, but they run home to buy their copy of Pokemon Silver to find another save file with scary stuff going on. The save file had all 251 Pokemon, all badges, and 999 hours and 99 minutes on the file. However, their team was 5 level 5 unknown and a level 5 Cyndaquil called Hurry Up with only the moves Leer and Flash. The poster found themselves in a modified version of Bellsprout Tower, where surrounded in the dark they would use Hurry's Flash, illuminating a blood red room. I had no choice but to head south. The screen got darker every 20 steps I made, until I finally made it to the end, which appears to be a sign. I read the sign which said, "Turn back now." Suddenly, I was asked to answer yes or no, but there was no question asked. I chose yes, as I did not know what it was asking, and the screen went black again, making a ladder climb to sound. I was in another dark room, but I held my breath and used flash again. Suddenly, it said that Hurry has fainted, which was odd since I recalled that there was no status effect like poison on him, and it clearly wasn't in a battle. I checked my Pokemon quickly, and suddenly he's no longer in my party. In fact, after a bit of investigating, none of my Pokemon are, but instead all are replaced with level 10 unknown. I did the same thing as before and spelled out the unknown. My then team of unknown spelled, he died. The player finally decided to check out their trainer profile to see Gold missing his arms, giving a sad expression, and for some reason in possession of 24 badges instead of the usual maximum of 16. After wandering around, the animation for escape rope plays suddenly, except instead of rising upwards, the player sinks downwards. The player sprite turned completely white, and the sprite in the trainer profile now lacks legs, and bloody tears appear from its eyes. However, he does now have 32 badges, double the maximum of the game, so it appears he's moving upwards in the world. The player's Pokemon now consist of 5 unknown that spell out dying, and a level 100 shiny Celebi with Perish Song, except missing a leg, arm, and eye. The player eventually encounters Red like you would in Mount Silver, except in this purgatory-like version of Bellsprout Tower. Red's sole Pokemon was a level 255 Pikachu with the moves Curse, Flail, Frustration, Mean Look, and unlike most normal Pokemon, it had a 5th move, Destiny Bond. The player defeated Red, and then upon checking their profile, Gold's trainer sprite looks like just a disembodied head with dead eyes, but he now has 40 badges, so I guess everything's okay. The player's party now consisted of 6 shiny unknown that spell out no more. They didn't appear back in their room in New Bark, but as a disembodied ghost. They exit the house to find another void and continue trekking south. They encounter an NPC that looks like Gold, who just says goodbye forever. Their trainer profile shows no sprites and no badges, and instead of gym leaders, it shows skulls. Their Pokemon consist of 6 unknown that spell out, "I'm dead." As soon as I went back to the overworld, the room I was supposedly in was then covered with the same blocks as the walls. I then figured out exactly what the room was when the final text said RIP. That room was a big grave surrounded by other graves. Gold has already been dead. He died presumably a few years after he defeated Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and attempts at being a Pokemon master, was still unable to avoid the inevitable fate of death, and his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. I wasn't able to escape that text no matter what I pressed. I tried resetting the game, and the same thing happened, at which I finally decided to give up on that horrible nightmare. After that experience, I will never look at the gimmick unknown the same way again. They say that only the first generation have folk tales and legends, but the second generation has shown me how unpleasant the truth can be. I eventually enjoyed Soul Silver immensely, but I still can't unthink what that rigged game has told me. Lost Silver is an iconic, albeit shallow, experience. Like Pokemon Black, it ends with the author tackling the themes of their fictional hacked game, this time by interpreting it as a form of a person who was at the best of their time and ended up being abandoned. Although I'm not exactly sure how generous this interpretation was, considering the themes of being forgotten aren't outlined very well, but it is an interesting take on the post-game of Gold and Silver. Red, considered the best of his region, is the final challenge to Gold, or Chris or Lyra, the only player character in the series to obtain 2 regions worth of badges in defeating the Elite Four twice, a little representation of the strongest in their field being surpassed just a few years later. Ironically, unlike protagonists in the series, we don't have an exact direct confirmation of what happened to Gold after Gold and Silver, so in a lot of ways he was abandoned. Despite how much more in-depth Lost Silver is, it is in my opinion a lot less scary than Black. Perhaps it's that with 16 years on it, bears the weight of its many successors, the next year birthing the more infamously recognized Been Drowned series. Lost Silver, unlike Been Drowned in Black, is notable for having a playable version of it. Yes, the cycle of a story about a scary ROM hack actually birthed the same scary ROM hack, coming out just a year later in 2010, the year that marks the zenith of the creepypasta craze. Lost Silver is a pretty faithful adaptation that I generally like. Lost Silver's cultural impact might have lessened over the years. Pioneers are not often as rewarded as the ones they inspire. So let's talk about the biggest success stories out of these creepypastas. Lavender Town Syndrome, or the Lavender Town Tone.
Attention Pokemon fans, get ready for Pokemon Live at the Fox Theater. Now you can be there as all your favorite characters come to life in this.
Lavender Town is a town in the Kanto region best known for being fucking haunted. People only familiar with Lavender Town from much more recent games might not be as aware, but in Generation 1, Lavender Town was the closest thing this franchise actually got to feeling haunted. The key fixture in this town is Lavender Tower, a multi-level tower of graves of Pokemon, full of psychics and ghosts non-visible with the naked eye, all while playing the eeriest music playable by the Game Boy speakers. All of this was toned down considerably for the Gen 3 remakes of the Kanto games, Fire Red and Leaf Green.
And Lavender Tower got rebuilt or repurposed in the Johto games to become Radio Tower.
Which seems insanely disrespectful to me, IMO. Imagine burying your Pokemon somewhere for that place to get destroyed for a fucking radio tower. Lavender Town started up as a series of separate internet urban legends and creepypastas stemming around Lavender Town Syndrome. The initial creepypasta really taps into the roots of creepypasta of being super short and fictionalized from the bottom up. So in Pokemon Green and the Japanese version of Red, the theme of Lavender Town was higher pitched and a little grating on the ears. But when the games were localized as Pokemon Red and Blue for other countries, the tone was pitched down a little bit. This can be attributed as Pokemon Red and Green composer Junichi Masuda fixing a song to be a little less grating on the ears. But Lavender Town Syndrome considers the idea of what if the reason the song was adjusted was because it made children end their own lives. As we all know, the average range of human hearing is 20 to 20,000 hertz, but these are not fixed numbers. Studies have recorded human beings being able to listen to frequencies above and below that range. These upper frequencies will slowly shrink over one's life naturally, or much more quickly if someone works in a loud environment like a construction site, or attends a lot of loud concerts, or undergoes menopause. Generally, adults' 15,000 and above range will fall off first in one's life. So generally, children will have a greater range of hearing than adults, but that's not always the case. Some adults can have exceptionally sensitive ears as well. So the concept of Lavender Town affecting primarily children probably stems from the fact that children have higher hearing ranges and are more likely to be playing a game for children. If it sounds like I'm trying to state the obvious here, it's why the rest starts becoming a stretch. Lavender Town Syndrome implies some level of cognitive disconnect, similar to the concept of binaural beats. Binaural beats are an effect caused by playing a tone in one ear and another tone approximately 10 Hz higher in the other ear. This will cause the listener to perceive a third tone between the tones. This phenomenon was discovered back in 1839 by Heinrich Wilhelm Dove. And while we knew that this happened here, there was still much research to do on the implication of the discovery. In 1973, Gerald Oster published an article in Scientific American called Auditory Beats in Brains, which documents the studies that have happened since Dove's initial discovery, which isn't a lot, but speaks hopefully about the future connection between binaural beats and cognitive neuropsychology. However, if you know anything about audio, neuropsychology, or the Game Boy, you know I've been bearing the lead. Binaural beats have no proven effect on the brain other than hallucinating a tone that doesn't exist. It's honestly an effect similar to chords. The Game Boy has 4 audio channels divided into 2 pulse waves, 1 wave, and a noise channel. These 4 channels are mixed, amplified, and then outputs the Game Boy's mono speakers or to a headphone jack. Yes, technically songs on the Game Boy can be in stereo and have panning, but red, green, and blue and yellow do not on every song besides the Team Rocket Hideout. Lavender Town's theme is in mono. So the only known effect in audio that could possibly, and I really mean possibly, affect a child's psychology could not happen on a Game Boy, even with headphones, cause, quote, more than 2,000 children to end their own life? Absolutely not. I realize it's a work of fiction, but it's one that I just reject with my whole heart. As a child, I liked Pokemon Lost Silver and Pokemon Black. I could not stand Lavender Town Syndrome, and everything else about it ends up being fake too. Take for example the mini spectrograms with messages written with unknown. I know the obvious that Unknown wasn't released until Gen 2, which didn't release until 1999, but to give the writers the benefit of the doubt in a way that could not be expected at the time, we found it in the time since then that Unknown have existed in the 1997 Space World demo with an identical name and design.
To put this in perspective, most Pokemon in this demo weren't finished at all. The Chikorita line was the only remotely finished starter line, and Bayleaf isn't at all identical.
So does this mean that Unknown could have existed in 1996 and appeared in a spectrogram? Absolutely not! Unknown is core to the identity of Generation 2, but Red and Green struggled to get to the finish line. If they had any extra Pokemon, they might have considered putting them in. Not to mention the limitations of the Game Boy hardware would make it nearly impossible to make music that could create a spectrogram image without sounding like an absolute mess. So why would anyone believe this or get into this creepypasta enough that it became a thing for a little bit? Well, I believe it's in two parts. One, notice how all three of these stories borrow something or another from Lavender Town. Pokemon Black takes the ghost to make the famous Pokemon character Ghost. Lost Silver takes sprites and imagery from Lavender Town, and Lavender Town Syndrome takes the music. Two is the associated Dino Senshi Porygon incident. Dino Senshi Porygon was the 38th episode of the Pokemon anime released in 1997, known primarily for an event in Japan referred to as Pokemon Shoku, or Pokemon Shock. In the episode, Ash, Misty, and Brock go to a Pokemon Center to heal their Pokemon, where they learn that the Pokemon transmission device isn't working. Nurse Joy asks the three to go visit Professor Akihabara, named after Tokyo's famous electric town, where the professor tells them his Pokemon Porygon has been stolen by Team Rocket in cyberspace. The trio jack in and defeat Team Rocket and save Porygon, but Nurse Joy begins running an antivirus on the Pokemon transmission program, not knowing that Ash, Misty, Brock, and Team Rocket are still inside. The antivirus manifests missiles that launch, and Pikachu fires a thunderbolt at it, causing an infamous moment flashing blue and red, destroying the missiles in Professor Akihabara's house. This moment caused 685 people to be sent to the hospital for seizures, primarily children. This also resulted in about 12,000 other medical reports, like headaches and nausea from the event. In retrospect, it's been learned that this incident was just gross negligence. Everyone on the staff just thought that the strobing effect was cool and didn't expect it to hurt anyone. Because of this, the anime stopped airing new episodes for the next 4 months, leaving some of the anime to air out of order for the rest of the series. Dino Senshi Porygon joined the handful of episodes of the anime that never released outside of Japan, but it was definitely the most infamous out of all of them. As a result, Porygon and its evolutions Porygon 2 and Porygon Z have never been featured heavily in the Pokemon anime since then, despite Pikachu being the one who caused the effects. I feel bad for the Porygon line, but I assume it has something to do with wanting to avoid the words Porygon in anime ever being searched. Lavender Town is clearly based on the Pokemon Shock incident and probably gained some level of credibility because of people conflating the two. To someone who heard about one incident, the other might seem like it actually happened. Fortunately, Lavender Town is not much more than edgy fan fiction of an event that didn't occur. However, like many creepypastas, Lavender Town mutated and evolved. Let's talk about a related creepypasta, Lavender Town and Pokemon 731. Lavender Town and Pokemon 731 details some of the information we already knew about this setting. In this creepypasta, Lavender Town Syndrome exists, and the Lavender Town tone does in fact cause physical issues as outlined before, ending one's life, insomnia, headaches, other neurological and behavioral issues. However, Pokemon 731 is a creepypasta equally more researched and more problematic. 731 details an ex-Game Freak developer, Sato Harui, a Game Freak employee that leaked details of the full effects of Lavender Town Syndrome to the world. Kyoki Katsume, April 12, 1996. 11. Obstructive sleep apnea, several migraines, orthorhgia, tinnitus. Attacked a police officer near a government building and was killed. Hiroyuki Chiba, May 23, 1996. 12. General irritability, insomnia, addiction to video games, nosebleeds. Developed into violent streaks against others and eventually himself. Suicide. Hisai Momoi, April 27, 1996. 11. Cluster headaches, irritability. Self-harmed and carved the kanji symbols for Empire into his wrists, and then died. Suicide. Tamima Yoshinaga, April 4, 1996.
7. Migraines, sluggish and slow behavior, unresponsiveness, developed into deafness and went missing. Body discovered besides road, death. Hundreds of Japanese children fell victim to these effects. As you can see, these binaural beats led to many problems, including symptoms of brain hemorrhaging and violent actions against others.
So with any level of a discerning eye, this is already obviously fabricated. We discussed how Pokemon Red and Green could not have used binaural beats, and how even if they did, there's no scientific evidence that it could affect people's psychology and physical state enough that they would harm themselves. In fact, I have not mentioned it yet because a lot of the information about binaural beats is dubious at best, but most people regard binaural beats as relaxing. Sato Harui also, as you may have figured, does not exist. Red and Green were made by incredibly small teams, and no one used any pseudonyms for the game either. And because the leaks took place after the release of Red and Green, they would have no reason to remove her from the credits. Sato Harui also reveals a quote, ghost animation, described in fictional writing piece Lavender Town in Pokemon 731 as, quote, fictional. A ghost throughout the Lavender Tower would appear with photographs of corpses and screaming faces and, quote, the Grim Reaper, unquote. Although this animation does not exist, in a recalled version of Pokemon Red and Green, there is a Pokemon with no name, just a Pokédex number 731, a glitch Pokemon. There's like a good chance someone out there who's really into the Generation 1 games is pointing at their screen right now. Just wait a second, we'll get into it. Generation 1 games are glitchy, understatement of the century, I know, but Generation 1, due to various programming oversights, has many glitched Pokemon in the game, unable to be obtained in normal ways. The most well-documented one is Missing No, a bird in normal type that most people generally remember in its square pixelated form. Bird is a type that exists only in the code of Generation 1 and 2. I'd probably assume it was the original name for flying types, but got changed due to flying being more inclusive of non-birds. You probably know this Missing No, but there's actually 39 different Missing No's in Green, Red, and Blue. Some appearing with the blocky appearance, some appearing like fossils, some appearing like ghosts, and all having different values for their special stat. However, Missing No is not the only glitch Pokemon in Generation 1. Index species numbers are stored in 8 bits, meaning 256 values are stored. There are 151 Pokemon in Generation 1, meaning that the remaining 105 correspond to invalid Pokemon, or what we consider glitch Pokemon. This might surprise you, but Missing No is not actually the most common glitch Pokemon, it's Oo, the small katakana character for Oo. This is due to it being a common code point for the Game Boy assembly code. Oo takes up 43 slots of Glitchmons, Missing No takes up 39, leaving 23 more uniquely named Glitchmons. Some more common ones using the small A, and then O, and then A. A lot of remaining Glitchmons are random strings of characters with random stats. 731 is a little bit more well-researched than the average creepypasta, however it doesn't make it more smart or more knowledgeable. Sorry 731 fans, there is no Pokemon in Generation 1 numbered 731. There is no Pokemon named 731. There is no Pokemon that could be 731. They just didn't want to name it XU XU or Pokemon A, Pokemon U, Male F. In 2010, there was not yet a Pokemon 731 indexed yet. However, we had already gotten to Pokemon 649. In 2013, XY came out with another 69 Pokemon to a grand total of 721 Pokemon. So we would not get 731 until Sun and Moon in 2015, 6 years after the creepypasta. So this Pokemon of great intrigue with no corresponding Glitchmon, what did it end up being? It's Pipipeck, the little bird. While we continue, please remember that the evil Glitchmon 731 is Pipipeck, the little bird. If you were a little bit aware of Pokemon 731, you probably already know why it's called 731, but the reasoning does not make it much better. There's 3 different ways to catch Pokemon 731. The easiest way is a single square of grass on Route 7, the tiny route between Celadon City and Saffron City. You could also get it by using the Old Man glitch, a common method to obtain Glitchmons, or the small stretch on Cinnabar, another common method to obtain Glitchmons. But in this case, only if your name is GCA, all lowercase. This is in fact cap, fiction, false, wrong. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty believing this. My immersion is broke. But let's see what the creepypasta has to say about Pokemon 731. The Pokemon itself is strange in nature. It does indeed use the ghost sprite, along with some flashing static.
However, about 20 frames in, it becomes a flashing series of low-quality pictures. 2 of the clearest have been included, figures 2, 3, and 4. Figure 2 appears to be a man standing over a table upon which something hard to identify, a corpse perhaps, rests. He has his hands on the unknown object and also has what may be a surgical mask over his mouth. This strengthens the theory that it is a body in a frame. Figure 3 appears to be a low-resolution image of a building, the significance of which will be explained later. Figure 4 is possibly one of the strangest images, a picture of the Imperial Japanese flag with the 2 kanji symbols that mean Emperor in the bottom right corner.
I think Emperor Hirohito of the Empire of Japan might be the villain of my YouTube channel. So let's get into what Lavender Town and Pokemon 731 thinks the significance of 731 in this imagery is, starting with a deep dive into Game Freak. Shin Nakamura was a programmer working at Game Freak and married to our whistleblower, Sato Harui.
Miss Harui, who leaked the list of children affected by the Lavender Tone, was trained in musical skills and in charge of sound design. In order to gather more information on this subject, I traveled to Japan to interview Miss Harui, who lives now in the small town of Toma, in the Kamakawa district of the Hokkaido prefecture. Initially unwilling to answer my questions, she finally relented and gave me the information I desired. The reason she had leaked the list of children was partially due to personal guilt. Mr. Nakamura had asked to tweak the Lavender Town theme. Miss Harui accepted and Mr. Nakamura added the tone. In the middle of the night after the game release, Mr. Nakamura committed suicide in the Aokigahara forest by hanging himself in a tree, leaving a letter addressed to Miss Harui below him. Their son Ken was killed in an automobile accident down the road from their house, naked with several cracked ribs, frothing at the mouth and heavily bleeding from his nose due to a brain hemorrhage. The 2 kanji symbols for Emperor were also carved into his chest. The story that Miss Harui had told me is that while Ken was sleeping, Mr. Nakamura had put headphones on his child and played the Lavender Tone and then left. Eventually, their son woke up due to the effects of the tone, cut the symbols onto himself with a kitchen knife, and then attempted to attack the passengers of a nearby car. Frightened, they ran him over and then drove off. Unfortunately, her story was not accepted by the police, although the bloody kitchen knife was present in his bedroom.
However, Shin Nakamura left Sato behind a letter, detailing that he had designed the Lavender Tone with the intention to create a second-rate Japanese empire by turning children into warriors after playing the game. Pokemon 731 is named after the infamous research in Harbin, Manchuria, Unit 731. Unit 731 is known best for extremely unethical human experimentation and biological weapons testing. Shin Nakamura's father, Hoshu Nakamura, worked in Division 4 of Unit 731 as the director of experimentation related to audio engineering.
From here, we can only speculate what responsibilities that title held, but one can only guess that the Lavender Tone was engineered here between the screams of vivisected patients and the smoke of burning bodies. Now recall figures 2 and 3. As figure 2 pictures a man in a surgical mask holding a body, it was likely taken by Mr. Nakamura himself at the facility. Figure 3 looks similar to the main entrance to the facility. We gather that the rest of these photos are patients of Unit 731 in buildings of the facility. The effects themselves were certainly not as great as Mr. Nakamura hoped. There is no second Japanese empire, but only a few hundred Japanese children who died in fits of rage against government officials and themselves he is responsible for. This is mainly thanks to the quick actions of Miss Harui and Game Freak removing the tone and the secret code and images which Mr. Nakamura implemented into the game. Mr. Nakamura also neglected to see the effects were hardly present at all without the use of headphones during the Lavender Town segment specifically. The quiet and fast recall by Nintendo is also a contributing factor. Miss Harui continues to live alone with her cats in Toma, Hokkaido, working as a store clerk. She left Game Freak shortly after her husband's suicide and her child's death. Sadly, she has all but given up trying to spread awareness of the events which led to the loss of her child. Update: Miss Harui passed away from leukemia on May 3rd, 2001. This page is now dedicated to her. May she rest in peace.
Thus concludes Lavender Town and Pokemon 731. Let's clear the air about Shin Nakamura. Just like Sato, he does not exist. Pokemon Red and Green were programmed by 5 people, none of which are named Shin Nakamura. However, there was a Shin Nakamura who worked on the 1999 film Pokemon the Movie 2000, and the year 2000 film Pokemon the Movie 3, Entei and the Power of the Unknown, as an editor. The music and sound effects for Pokemon Red and Green were worked entirely by Junichi Masuda. I'd also like to mention that there's no expectation at all that the original Pokemon games were going to be a success. Game Freak was an incredibly small studio that went from a small magazine creator to a tiny game studio that was making games like Mendel Palace and Pulse Man. Red and Green being not only a successful game, but now a 30+ million selling game is incredible. Junichi Masuda was only 28 when the game came out. I'm glad you believe that a 28-year-old was smart enough to make a song capable of brainwashing people. When I was 28, I was making a video about how I think a Finnish rapper is probably the mouth of Jeff the Killer. Let's also get into the more ethical dilemmas of making light of Unit 731. Obviously, Hoshu Nakamura doesn't exist. The units outlined in the creepypasta of Unit 731 also aren't exact, and specifically Hoshu's unit, Unit 4, is actually responsible for bacteria mass production and storage. I do not say this lightly. At least 14,000 people died within the facility, and an estimated 200,000 Chinese died as a result of the actions of Unit 731. They experimented on children and pregnant women. They deliberately infected people with diseases and bacteria. Everyone who worked here should be in jail, but were given immunity to their crimes due to the US in exchange for their research. The amount of lies needed to make this creepypasta work, the amount of edgy references to Unit 731, the nearly xenophobic but slightly informed references to Japan and Japanese language. Like, who wrote this? Who genuinely wrote this? There's many more Pokemon creepypastas, but none will be as filled as holes as Pokemon 731. 731 is a finished story with no substance. Everything about it is fake, but for some reason it makes it feel like the most interesting creepypasta we spoke about today. Sometimes our understanding of the past is incomplete, and perhaps to the author of 731, it was at the time research, but with the limited understanding we had in 2011. We didn't have everything understood and data mined, hundreds of interviews translated and available, and we certainly didn't have the vast amount of information gained from Game Freak and Nintendo's leaks in the following years. Pokemon Black and Lost Silver are a look back into a time that people understood these games less and didn't have roughly 15 extra years of information that we do now. The modern equivalent of video game archaeology, finding someone else's work and making your own assumptions and stories based upon it. It feels like now fandoms are more rooted in facts. Hundreds of thousands of Pokemon fanworks exist as explanations into the world we share and not visions into the depths from people who have not been there yet. My next work, I too will be peering into the depths with an experimentation of my own creepypasta for a modern time. Stay tuned for a preview of that, but first I'd like to thank everyone who made it this far in the video. I had a lot of fun writing this video, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Still a relatively small channel, so if you could subscribe, that would do me a huge favor. I primarily cover horror content, video games, and film, sometimes all three. Thank you all, and I will see you all next time.